Comms check. Y'all hear me all right? This is Roche Orbital, broadcasting from interstellar space. We're currently on a mission to the center of a neighboring galaxy called Andromeda. Our station's hyperdrive is modified with Forerunner technology, so we are currently moving at 3C, which is 3 times the speed of light. You know, this galaxy was once described as a spiral nebula, but one astronomer had a different perception. His name was Edwin Hubble. I think it would be fitting for us to talk about his life and career as we travel to his greatest discovery. Hubble's story begins in Marshfield, Missouri in 1889. As a young boy, Hubble spent most of his free time playing sports, excelling in basketball and football. But when Hubble was alone, he would find himself lost in imagination while reading science fiction novels. He spent his days running around the planet Earth, and at night he would fly through the stars. After Hubble finished high school, he enrolled at the University of Chicago in 1906 and graduated with a bachelor's in mathematics and astronomy. Hubble was learning more about space and fueling his passion. After graduating, he entered Oxford University to study law philosophy in an attempt to fulfill his father's expectations, and he earned a degree in jurisprudence after 3 years. I'm sure Hubble would have been a great lawyer, but I'm glad he chose his own path. He left Oxford and went back to the University of Chicago and earned a PhD in astronomy. After college, Hubble was offered a job at the Mount Wilson Observatory in California. He was given access to the 100-inch Hooker telescope, which was the largest telescope in the world. But at the same time Hubble was starting his new dream job, humanity had started another war with itself, with the hope of gaining something out of mass destruction. Hubble felt the urge to serve his country, and in 1917, he enlisted into the United States Army. He served in World War I as a field officer, eventually earning the rank of major by the time he was discharged. World War I was a bloody and brutal conflict that killed millions of fathers, brothers, and friends. I often wonder how many curious and brilliant young men were snuffed out by the fires of war before they got a chance to express themselves to the rest of the world. Luckily, Hubble survived the conflict, and when he returned, he took the job at the observatory. He didn't spend his time looking at our solar system, though. He was gazing into deep space, where faint objects revealed themselves. He began studying fuzzy stellar bodies that were called spiral nebulae. Nebulae are enormous clouds of cold gas and dust where stars are born. These nebulae come in every kind of shape you can imagine, and Hubble found himself gazing at the Andromeda Nebula. While he was researching Andromeda, Hubble found his first Cepheid variable star. These stars change in luminosity over time in a cycle, and by measuring these fluctuations in brightness, astronomers can determine the star's distance from Earth. Hubble calculated the star's distance and found that it was far away from Earth. So far, in fact, that it seemed to be outside of our Milky Way galaxy entirely. This was a shocking discovery to Hubble, because at the time, mainstream science said the Milky Way galaxy made up the whole universe. Hubble ran the numbers multiple times, as a good scientist should, and continued to observe different variable stars in deep space. To his surprise, he found many more stars to be a great distance away from us, a distance so far that a new view on the universe needed to be unveiled. The Andromeda Nebula wasn't a clump of gas floating through space, but another galaxy entirely full of stars, exoplanets, and its own nebulae. After years of compiling his data and going over his numbers, Hubble released his findings in 1929 in a paper he titled Extragalactic Nebulae. In this paper, he showed that the spiral nebulae that astronomers had researched for decades were actually enormous galaxies like our own. These galaxies were very far away from us, and there were plenty in the sky to see. This was a groundbreaking discovery for not just astronomy, but for humanity. Our vast universe seemed to be even bigger than we had imagined it in the past. Hubble's paper was met with some criticism from fellow astronomers, which is normal and healthy for science as a whole. One of the most vocal people that spoke out against Hubble's paper was fellow astronomer Harlow Shapley. He argued that the spiral nebulae could still exist within the Milky Way, that Hubble's paper lacked sufficient data for such a proposal, and that the idea that these nebulae were galaxies was very premature. But Shapley went over Hubble's data more and more, until he came around to support him later. Shapley is quoted saying, "The effect of the work of Hubble and his colleagues has been to make us realize that our sun is but a minor member of a vast assemblage of stars, the Milky Way system, and that the Milky Way is in turn but one of thousands of such systems, which make up the universe." Hubble didn't stop there, and in the same paper, he showed that these galaxies were moving away from us. All the galaxies he saw were moving away from one another, and gaining in speed over time. The light from these distant galaxies was redshifted, which means that the observer and the object are moving away from one another. Hubble noticed this and concluded that all galaxies were in constant movement. This was evidence of universal expansion on every level. But Hubble wasn't sold on the idea right away. It's possible that the discovery of other galaxies was enough for him at the time, and the universe expanding was a lot to grasp. But Hubble was a phenomenal scientist, and he most likely wanted more evidence before claiming universal expansion. Regardless, Hubble's work moved humanity one step closer to understanding our place in the universe, a vast plane inhabited by stars, planets, galaxies, and us. Cognitive dissonance is when a person struggles to grasp the truth, when it turns out to be different from the one they thought they already had. This can occur to anyone, as we are human, and it can be difficult to admit that what you thought was right all along was actually wrong. I grew up looking at life through a certain lens, and when I turned 19, everything I thought I knew about the world was flipped upside down. It was very hard for me to accept this new view on our existence. But I persevered, and instead of digging my heels in and sticking to what I thought was, I opened my mind to what is. Learning about these great scientists like Edwin Hubble that push past the edges of the envelope and plunge themselves into the unknown truly inspires me every day. I think it's very important in our day-to-day lives and in the realm of science to always be open to new possibilities. Today I'd like to leave you with a quote from Albert Einstein. I found this excerpt while reading an old astronomy book. His words: "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed." This is Roche Orbital, signing off. Y'all be easy.